Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, the mysterious spirit bears of the British Columbia coast, presented by Eddy Savage. Since 2016, Eddy has been guiding for NatHab across the globe, including North America, China, and Switzerland. We're so happy to have you with us today, Eddy. I'm going to hand things off to you.
Right on. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Very excited to be here to share with you your daily dose of nature. Today, of course, I'll be presenting on the spirit bear, but I'll kind of continue with a bit of a background of me. So I've been guiding now for 13 years, mostly in British Columbia. I started working very, very close to what is called the Great Bear Rainforest back in 2008, leading multi-day kayaking expeditions in that region and all that kind of stuff. I've also been a grizzly bear viewing guide since 2013. And a whale watching guide since 2008, sporadically all the way, and then again from 2013 to present in the Great Bear Rainforest region. 2016, I joined up with Natural Habitat Adventures, doing their polar bear trips, and then their Northern Lights trips, and then their China trips, and then their Churchill summer trips. And recently, 2019, I started doing their Switzerland trips. So very excited to be a part of Natural Habitat Adventures. I absolutely love working with them and working with the team in Boulder, Colorado to deliver some of the most fantastic expeditions this world has to offer. So it's definitely a pride of mine to work with NatHab, and even more so to be able to share some information, especially on the beautiful spirit bear. So spirit bears, this presentation, I'm going to basically go over not just like what a spirit bear is, what makes a spirit bear, but I'm going to kind of emphasize, where spirit bear can be found, threats, conservation, kind of things going on, a lot of the cultural information around the spirit bear as well. So it's going to be a multifaceted presentation, lots of information coming your way. But as with most species, I've got about 30 to 40 minutes with you. And so there's going to be some stuff that maybe gets left out, either on purpose or I just didn't have time for it. But I'm going to try to cover as much as I can today in my 30 to 40 minutes. So the spirit bear, beautiful, beautiful animal, incredibly rare, arguably the rarest bear, at least in Canada for sure, if not the world, to actually track down and find in the world. I want to emphasize this for you as I get into this presentation, which is I've been working in the Great Bear Rainforest for 8 years. I've put in literally 500 to 600 days of bear viewing and seeking out bears. However, I am not in the part of the Great Bear Rainforest where the Kermode bear or the spirit bear is. I'm slightly down to the south. And so I often get asked, working in the Great Bear Rainforest, Eddy, have you seen a spirit bear? And I say, no, they're actually a couple hundred kilometers to the north of me. And that's because their range is so small. The area where they can be found is so small that even working 70 kilometers to the south or 100 kilometers to the south of where one of the core areas for spirit bears is, the chances of seeing one in that region is pretty much zero. So I'm gonna talk about kind of where they are and that kind of thing coming up. But to give you an idea of the population of spirit bears, the white bear, the white phase, that white color phase that we're looking at on the screen right now, there's some estimates that say there's between 50 and 150 of them on Earth, and there's some that say there may be between 100 and 500 individuals. If you can imagine yourself in an incredibly dense, heavily forested rainforest, finding those bears and being able to count every single one is next to impossible. But researchers have kind of employed some really interesting ways to actually figure out how many of those bears are around and how far their genes are going. But I'll get into that in a minute. So this is where you can find them. You can kind of see on the map there that you've got up on the top left, you've got the USA or Alaska, but you come down south of the Panhandle. You can also see just south of that box that's kind of illuminated there that there's Vancouver Island, for anybody that has been to Vancouver Island before. So somewhere in between the northern tip of Vancouver Island and the southern edge of the Alaska Panhandle, you have this tract of coastal temperate rainforest. And then right in the heart of that tract of coastal temperate rainforest, you have this very high density of Kermode bear. It's actually a separate subspecies. Ursus americanus would be your black bear. Ursus americanus kermode would be your Kermode bear. And that name comes from Kermode, comes from the director, or the first director of the Royal British Columbia Museum, way back in the early 1900s. He was one of the first, among others, to begin studying or to identify and kind of categorize the spirit bear and the Kermode bear. Those names are not interchangeable. I'll tell you why in just a minute. But the main islands that the Kermode bears, or the spirit bears, I'm going to correct myself there, the main islands that the spirit bears can be found on are Roderick Island, Gribble Island, and Princess Royal Island. You can potentially find the spirit bear, that white phased bear, on some of the surrounding regions, but with less likelihood. On those islands, it's roughly 1 in 10 black bears or Kermode bears carries the white colored fur, making it a spirit bear. So anyway, it's extraordinarily remote. And I'll just pop over to the next slide here so you can get a better idea. So on the left-hand side there, many of you may have heard the term Great Bear Rainforest. The Great Bear Rainforest begins kind of mid-Vancouver Island in Butte Inlet and then continues up all the way to the Panhandle of Alaska. Now that region, the Great Bear Rainforest, the reason why they call it that is because it is literally the largest, mostly intact section or tract of coastal temperate rainforest on the planet. That area contains intact valleys with intact river systems, healthy rivers, strong salmon runs. There's an absence of large-scale development within the big valleys. If you were to go south of Butte Inlet, all of those valleys either have been logged in a very large way. Maybe they're mined. They might have run-of-river hydroelectric projects on them, or even farther south, you could get into valleys that are just farmed, and those big, deep valley bottoms have farms in them, and it makes the interaction with humans really, really high. So that makes it more difficult for bears to move freely across their range and interbreed with different populations. So south of the Great Bear Rainforest, you get into a lot more fragmented habitat. Whereas right in the Great Bear Rainforest, if you were a bear starting at Butte Inlet, you could, and you decided you want to walk pretty much to Alaska, you could do so with very little interaction with people that entire way. So the combination of kind of this dense forest and these salmon-bearing rivers basically provides like the perfect environment for bears, and the Great Bear Rainforest is home to some of the highest densities of bears on the planet. Which is pretty remarkable. So that being said, you can see the Great Bear Rainforest on that left map, and then on the right map, you can actually see kind of the highest density region. This is from a recent study that came out not too long ago, at the beginning of the year, put together by the Spirit Bear Research Foundation. It was a First Nations-led study to determine, how effective, how concentrated the recessive white gene. Oh, sorry. Basically how concentrated that recessive gene is in certain regions. And so the highest concentration of that gene is in fact on Princess Royal Island. And then you can see that there's kind of these gray areas with the diagonal lines through them. That gray area with the diagonal lines through them, that's essentially where current conservancies are and where there's current protections in place, either for logging, hunting, etc. But you can see, like right in the core area of their habitat on Princess Royal Island, I'm just going to get my laser pointer out here. So right here, hope that's showing up. Right here in the core area, you can see that there's a very high probability of having a spirit bear or having one of the black bear Kermode bears carrying the recessive gene in this area, but it's not protected. So that was kind of part of this research program. But if I was to say this here, this is Princess Royal Island, the highest density and Gribble Island, and then Roderick Island nearby. That's going to be right in this region here. So right in the heart, I hope you can see my laser pointer on your screen, right in the heart of the Great Bear Rainforest is where these spirit bears live. So again, thousands upon thousands of salmon-bearing creeks and rivers, carrying Chinook, coho, sockeye, chum, pink salmon, all of that kind of stuff, which provides huge amounts of food for these bears. And it provides, like I said, in those valley bottoms during the salmon run, some of the highest densities of bears anywhere on Earth. And that goes on the mainland for grizzlies, and then on the islands for the black bears or Kermode bears. And then in addition to that, where we have the gene for the spirit bears. So really high density of bears. Another characteristic of the Great Bear Rainforest is, in fact, the large mountains and deep fjords. So a lot of the mountain range, the coast mountain range, kind of extends up towards Alaska. And over millennia, it's been carved, or successive ice ages, these fjords have been carved by glaciers, creating these really deep troughs where you can have inlets and fjords that are hundreds of feet deep to over 1,000 feet deep in some instances. One of the fjords I worked in towards the southern edge, I think the deepest point was about 1,650 feet, and that was, just a few hundred feet off the edge of the shore. So, pretty incredible terrain. With that, it's not just a rainforest. It's not just the Great Bear Rainforest. You could also call that area the Great Bear Sea. Those salmon that return, they also provide plentiful food for many marine mammals. But a really important part of the Great Bear Rainforest is they have incredibly powerful tidal fluctuations. So we're talking in a 6-hour period, you could have a tidal fluctuation of over 20 feet. And that can happen 4 times a day. Those would be some of the larger tides of the year. It allows for a lot of oxygen, especially given its location kind of to the north. We get the cold water coming down from the Bering Sea. So it's cold water with tons of oxygen in it, frequent tidal movements and fluctuation, which basically, it looks green on top, but as soon as you dip your head underwater, it's extraordinarily colorful with marine life, and extraordinarily biodiverse as well. So lots of food. And what that does is the Great Bear Sea, one of the reasons why you would call it that, is because it brings in lots and lots of animals. You're going to have year-round orcas, the big orcas, also known as transient orcas, that are mammal eaters, swimming around and hunting in those regions. You're going to have humpback whales that come back in the summertime to load up on that abundance of food that's there, sea lions, dolphins, porpoise seals, and so much more. So I'm trying to give you a good description of what the area where these bears is like, or where the bears live is like. And it is an incredibly magical part of the world, high density of wildlife and animals, as well as pristine forests. So what's in a name? Let's dive into spirit bears a bit more here. So what's in a name? They actually come by a lot of different names. In the local First Nations language, Moxkmal would be the name, and that essentially means white bear. So Mox would be white, and then Gmal would be bear. So white bear. And then spirit bear, the term spirit bear kind of comes from the cultural importance to the local First Nations. So Moxkmal, or white bear in local First Nation language, this bear is said to have been created by the raven. And the raven basically made 1 in 10 bears in the region white to remind the people of a time when glaciers covered the world and ice covered the world, and to be thankful for the lush and bountiful land today. So that's kind of the cultural association there with the Gitgat people and the Kitasoo people that live in the region, or share the region with the spirit bear. And ghost bear kind of comes with the elusiveness of this bear. Even up until the 1990s, the spirit bear was widely unknown to most of the world. It was kept a secret, and we'll get into some of the reasons why it was kept a secret. But it was kept a secret from the world. It was such a remote section of coastline that very few people traveled up there. There wasn't much as far as tourism goes, and the local people there knew it existed, but didn't really share it with the world for a multitude of reasons, but I'll kind of get into that a bit further down in my presentation. So as we discussed before, Kermode is named after Francis Kermode, the former director of the Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria, BC. And Kermode bear, or Ursus americanus Kermode, doesn't necessarily mean just the white-phased bear. Again, it is that subspecies of American black bear. So American black bears, they come in all sorts of different color phases. Probably one of the most common ones would be a cinnamon black bear. Maybe you've seen that. You've seen like a kind of a reddish brown or auburn black bear, or seen pictures of one. That would be like a cinnamon bear. Another rare, a more common color phase. But a spirit bear is essentially a black bear, American black bear, of the subspecies Kermode bear, that has white fur. And it's not just white fur tips. It is white fur all the way from the skin to the tip. It's white, totally white fur, which is pretty cool. And extraordinarily unique in the animal kingdom as well. So the spirit bear also, a question I often get is, hey, is this spirit bear is it an albino? And no, the answer to that is absolutely not. The spirit bear is not an albino. Albinos lack pigment in their fur, and it would appear white, but really the skin would be pink, the eyes would be pink, the nose would be pink. But with spirit bears, their nose is black, their eyes are brown. They carry a lot of the other traits. It is simply just a recessive color phase of the black bear. So there's also other bears around the world that have kind of a similar thing going on. This is a chinling giant panda, and you can see that it's got brown fur and brown and white fur, which is also a rare color phase. This one, however, it's kind of a mystery. Because of the rarity of this color phase, there's still lots of research to be done. They don't actually know. And then some of you may have seen like a grizzly bear that looks very, very blonde or nearly white. This would not classify as a Kermode bear. That's like the most often question, or one of the most common questions I get is a blonde grizzly bear or a blonde brown bear, is that a Kermode bear, or is a Kermode bear, or is a spirit bear a brown bear, and that kind of stuff. And it gets really confusing. So brown bear, grizzly bear, doesn't matter how white or blonde they are not your spirit bear. So let's just knock that back. And also this bear, even though it looks very blonde, nearly white, if you were to actually, go up there and wrestle your hand through the fur and get down to the base of the fur, you'd actually see that it's a very dark brown. So it's kind of like a blondish fur tip, or you could almost say a grizzled fur tip. Grizzly bear, grizzled fur tip. Okay, so how does a spirit bear come to be? Now, this picture, I like this picture. It's kind of interesting because, well, it shows you that there can be a white bear, the spirit bear, with two black cubs. How does that happen? Or how about this one? You've got a black mom with a white cub. How does that work? And again, white mom with a black cub. So we're going to jump into the genetics a bit, but I don't really want to hammer you too hard with that information. So I've created some handy dandy instructional slides here. But does anybody know a redhead? Ginger, perhaps? So if you've got red hair, you're carrying two recessive MC1R genes. Essentially, that's what decides the color of your hair, or the pigment of your hair. And if you have parents that are both redheads, you're probably going to get that redhead gene as well. It's like nearly 100% it's that you're going to be a redhead if you've got two redheaded parents. It's kind of the same with spirit bears. So here, let's look at this slide. So I tried to break it down in a simple way, but recessive genes. So in order to have a bear that becomes white, to get the spirit bear, that spirit bear's parents need to be carrying the recessive gene. So we're going to have to remember that, because it's very important as we work our way through the presentation. So the parents need to be carrying a copy of that recessive gene. However, if a parent, say, is carrying the dominant gene, which would be the black fur color phase, if a parent is carrying that black fur, that is always dominant, and so it's always more likely to be the copy of gene that gets passed down to their child or to their cub. So scenario one, let's go up here. We've got a black phase bear that has that B, the capital B, for the dominant black phase color. And then they are also carrying one copy of the recessive white fur gene. However, because they have a copy of the dominant gene, that is the one that presented itself as the color phase. So it's still carrying a copy of the white, but because it has that dominant gene, would be like brown hair for humans. If you had one parent or two parents that had brown hair, you know, anyway, I don't want to go down that road. But so you can see there that both of these parents are carrying a copy each of the recessive white gene and a copy each of the dominant black gene. So what that gives you is when they breed together, there's a 25% chance that this bear got both copies of the recessive gene from the parents, but more likely a 75% chance that at least one copy of the dominant black phase gene made it to that cub. So you could potentially have two black bears that give you a white cub, but more likely you're going to get the black phase color there. Now, if you have a spirit bear, the white phase here with double recessive gene, so it's got two copies of the white phase, and you have a Kermode bear that's got the black fur and has the copy of the dominant gene and then a copy of the recessive gene, you can have about a 50-50 chance that you'll get a spirit bear. So definitely from the spirit bear, they're going to pass down one copy of the white phase, and then the other parent that's got the dominant black phase coloring, 50-50 chance it'll send down either the black phase or the white phase. And same, if no matter what, this bear down here is going to get one copy of the white phase, but if it does end up getting that black phase dominant gene, it's going to be black. And then this is like your nearly surefire way to get a spirit bear, is if you have a spirit bear who's carrying two copies of the recessive white gene, and then another spirit bear that's carrying two copies, because they have to carry two copies to become white. The chance of their cub or their offspring being white is pretty much 100% right there. And then the other options, scenario 4, again, you've got a bear that has no copies of the recessive white gene, is potentially even from outside of the region where you may find the Kermode bears or the spirit bears. It's carrying two dominant genes, so it's definitely sending one of those down here. And then you could have either the dominant gene or the recessive gene sent here, but it doesn't matter because you've got the for sure thing with this totally black bear here. And then same here, even though you have a spirit bear, because of the two dominant genes present in this bear, you're going to get a black cub. And then, of course, if there's no genes and no white genes anywhere in the parents, this is like the rest of the population of bears in North America. It's like 100% chance you're going to get the black phase. Now, I certainly hope that made sense. It's not the easiest thing, but a really fun thing to do if you're like, how does this work? There's actually a lot of information online. Just type in, how do you get a redhead? Or how do you become a redhead? And there's some really good ways that is broken down. If you want to see like a diagram or something like that, it's essentially the same way that spirit bears would come to be. It's just a lot rarer or a lot less common in bears than it is to have a redhead. Interesting fact, 40 million redheads on Earth. Anyway, roughly. So, next. So, now I'm going to attempt to tackle why these bears are concentrated in the area that they are. There's a few theories, and one of them could be So during the last ice age or successive ice ages, there's areas along the coast of British Columbia, such as areas on on Haida Gwaii, the Brooks Peninsula on Vancouver Island, and some other areas as well, where they were actually ice-free during the ice age. They're called glacial refugia, and that typically in those areas you get all sorts of different endemic plants that basically survived what could have potentially been an extinction event from those successive ice ages. So there's a lot of interesting plants, but there's also potentially an advantage being a white bear in a white environment that could allow you to do better hunting. So there is kind of an idea out there that it could have something to do with maybe an isolated population of bears over time. Having the white fur gave them the advantage in an environment that was very much ice covered, snow covered, and a much lower temperature than we experience today. However, that's still something that is yet to be proven, and it's something I'm sure that people are looking at. Another interesting thing with bears is, how do you keep all these bears in kind of that tight region? How come those genes haven't spread? One of them is, well, the recessive gene part, but also breeding success. So there is a theory out there that spirit bears actually, especially the white bears, if they have a white mother, they may actually imprint on that white mother, and they might seek out in the future. They might seek out other white bears or other spirit bears to breed with, therefore creating more and more of these spirit bears. However, that and I mean the imprint is strong because it's not just like the cubs spend a few weeks with their mom. The cubs spend 2 years with their mom, and so they may just be really familiar hanging out with white bears, and that's who they end up breeding with, would be other white bears. However, that's not enough to ensure kind of the procession of their genes and keep it all in one place. It could be a factor, but that's something to definitely look at. Another interesting one that may kind of improve the odds of survival for the odds of those genes kind of perpetuating forward into the future is their fishing success. So there's been some really interesting studies done on the spirit bear to see how effective this white color phase is at fishing. And they found that spirit bears can be around 30% more successful at fishing during the day, which is really impressive. 30% more successful at fishing during the day compared to the black-furred spirit bear or black-furred bears. That gives them a huge advantage, being able to have 30% more salmon potentially, which allows them to gain more weight, which could potentially increase the number of cubs that they're capable of having, could increase the survival rate of the cubs that they do have, which could also kind of create a really strong, kind of a stronghold for the spirit bear in these regions, because they're just better at catching fish. They get more fish, and they can advance that way. Now, how did they find this out? Well, there was a lot of observation done on the spirit bear. So people just watching them hunt and calculating, how much the bears were taking. They also can look at, researchers have also looked at their fur. So they're capturing a little chunk of their fur. Essentially, you can take that and you can look at it you can basically break it down and get right down into the isotopes within that fur and figure out, basically you can figure out how much of their annual diet was derived from salmon or derived from a marine environment. And so they did that, and they found that the spirit bears with the white furred bears, they do have a higher percentage of marine food in their diet. So that also kind of proves the fact that, okay, maybe they are better at catching salmon, just like we've observed. And on another note, they did some kind of observation as well, where researchers went into the rivers wearing kind of like a white outfit to imitate the spirit bear, kind of the white color of the spirit bear. And they found that salmon are in fact slower to flee a researcher dressed in all white versus a researcher dressed in all black. Now, think about that. It could have something to do with the white blending in really well. In the Great Bear Rainforest, it's often cloudy, blending in with kind of that grayish white sky. A white bear maybe doesn't have the same effect as a dark black bear. So pretty interesting stuff there. Here's just an example of a bear standing with its white fur. Very nice. Some of you who have done the spirit bear trip already may have had the photographer of this, Moira Le Paterel, as their guide. She's phenomenal, and she helped me out with some pictures for this presentation, which is really cool. But shout out for Moira. Woo. Now let's move to cultural importance. This is not just it extends a lot deeper than I'm able to explain. But oral history belonging to the Kitasoo people tells of the raven, or the trickster, changing the coat color of every 10th black bear on Princess Royal Island to white, as a reminder of the harsh conditions endured during the Ice Age. The Gitga'at First Nation and the Kitasoo Hehe First Nation have lived alongside spirit bears for millennia, and they have a very deep-rooted connection to these animals. It's been rooted in their oral histories for thousands of years, and has kind of moved with those people as time has gone on, which is really quite incredible. In more recent years, the spirit bear has also become incredibly valuable economically to those communities, with tourism operations starting up, which would be part of the reason some of you who have been on that trip have already seen a spirit bear before. Another interesting thing that's happened in BC is in 2006, the spirit bear is the provincial mammal of British Columbia. So it's our provincial mammal. It's featured on license plates like this one here. I've got one of these. I think it's about $75 for the year, and I get to have this license plate. And a portion of the license plate fee goes towards the BC Park System, provincial park system, and I get to have this really beautiful spirit bear license plate on my truck, which is awesome. And so with that, it's not just the license plate, it's also the spirit bear has really been cast into the center stage. They are now very well known in British Columbia. They're talked about all the time. They're starting to make it into popular culture, and they're definitely the flagship. Like, there was actually an IMAX film that just came out called The Great Bear Rainforest, which focuses on the spirit bear and on the areas that I'm talking about. So if you're looking for some really beautiful cinematic television to watch or documentary to watch, I definitely go for that. It's narrated by Ryan Reynolds, another Canadian. Pretty cool. So they've been thrust into the limelight, and they're kind of becoming a flagship for the conservation and protection of the Great Bear Rainforest as a whole. So moving to that, let's talk about the future, past, present, and future conservation of bears. So this is always an interesting conversation to have, because everywhere that we go in the world, we're usually going to nature reserves, we're usually going to parks, we're usually going to areas that are protected for these species, or not necessarily for an individual species, but to protect kind of that land and that environment. And so the spirit bear being the flagship species now, let's kind of talk a little bit about what's going on in regard to some threats that maybe affect the long-term viability of spirit bear populations. And then also I'll get into a little bit of what's actually happening and what will happen into the future. So first things first, let's talk about trophy hunting. So if we go back to, I know it can be a touchy subject, but let's go back to kind of the late 1800s, early 1900s, when spirit bears really came to be. This was a period of time all throughout North America where museums in particular were seeking different specimens for their collections and to study and all that kind of stuff. And so there was a huge kind of influx into remote areas. There was entire expeditions sponsored by museums to get different specimens so that people could study them. And so trophy hunting, that occurred to a larger extent, I'd say, up until the 1930s, 40s, and into the 50s. And then by the 1950s, British Columbia had completely banned the hunting of the spirit bear, the white-phased bear. So we have to remember that. The bear that's in this picture could very well be, it was taken in the same range as spirit bears. It is the white, or it is the black phase of the Kermode bear. And it could be carrying the white recessive gene, but it's not expressing it because it has the dominant black gene. But this bear that we see in this picture could potentially, I'm not sure if it's male or female, could be the father or mother of a spirit bear down the line. So you're not allowed to hunt the white phase bear, that spirit bear, but you are allowed to hunt the black bear that's got the black fur, or the Kermode bear that carries the black phase, but maybe has a white recessive gene in the same area. So you're not completely protecting the gene, which is really important. If you want to protect that white phase, you actually need to protect all of the bears in that region, not just the ones that are expressing the recessive gene. So that's a bit of an issue, and especially with ecotourism taking off in a lot of these places, and in particular, kind of deep in the Great Bear Rainforest, bears really react to the different actions taken. So if you're on a photography trip, or you're on a nature trip, and you head into a beautiful, pristine river valley, and you sit there quietly, whispering amongst yourselves, waiting for that bear to wander down the river and start fishing for salmon. And that bear has seen so many people come and go in a very controlled manner. That bear becomes relaxed and comfortable around people. And that creates an environment where you can really have ecotourism take off. You can have very, very, very lovely experiences with bears. And you can kind of build on that, and it's a common thing. Whereas in the same regions, if you also have people rocking up in boats and then jumping out on shore and maybe shooting a bear, one of the black phased Kermode bears, then you start ending up kind of changing the behavior of bears, because they're maybe a little more wary around people. It definitely transfers through populations, and on top of that, you don't want to go to the same valley that bear hunters are going to, because on the same stretch of river, maybe a few hundred meters apart, you could have two completely different operations going on. You could have people that want to watch the bears, and then you could have somebody stalking around trying to shoot one. And then, of course, the really hard part, another really hard part about that is the trophy hunting. It's not even to fill your freezer with some meat. It's actually just for the paws, the head, and the hide, which is again something that is trying to stop. So in the Great Bear Rainforest, all of the First Nations groups whose territory covers the First Nation, or who covers the Great Bear Rainforest, made a declaration several years ago that trophy hunting was off limits. It was closed within their traditional territories to protect not only black bears, but also grizzly bears, the Kermode, spirit bears, etc. And that's something that's definitely a work in progress. 2017, British Columbia ended up banning the trophy hunt of grizzly bears. But this is definitely something that needs a lot of attention and work, in particular in the heart of the Great Bear Rainforest, where that rare recessive gene that creates the spirit bear exists. We can't be hunting those bears anymore. So anyway, on to the next. Another threat here in this image, you can see we've got a bit of logging that's happened. And so up until about 2009, a lot of the Great Bear Rainforest was widely unprotected, with only a scattering of conservancies that really didn't protect much. It was essentially open for business, open for harvesting. And where you have habitat degradation, the logging and displacement of wildlife and whatnot, if you log a big valley, you're going to have a change in the river system. You may have a decline in that salmon run. You may have flash flooding, etc., a loss of denning sites for bears, etc. So habitat degradation within the Great Bear Rainforest is something that is definitely being worked on. And I'm just going to show you kind of what's happened in the last 15 years in regard to protection in the Great Bear Rainforest for habitat. So on the very left, 2005, you can see the dark green areas. That's where the only conservancies that existed in 2005 were. Very little protected areas in that Great Bear Rainforest. And if we go and find ourselves Princess Royal Island right here, there's not a conservancy to be seen in the spirit bear habitat. Now, 2009, we get into quite a bit more. So areas where we've got these, the dark green with the angled lines, these are protected areas. They won't be logged anymore. And so if we go over to our Princess Royal Island, we're getting better. There's definitely a big chunk of their habitat that is becoming a little bit more protected, which is great. And then moving further on to 2016, you can definitely see there's more conservancies being put into place with protected areas, but there's still lots of areas. Now, this is kind of something that needs to be looked at very closely, this map, because it looks great. I mean, look how green all of that is. Wow, it looks like the whole thing is a park, but that's not what this means. So EBM basically means ecosystem-based management, and there's all of these different regions that are kind of this light green, 70 to 100%. It basically means that you're going to have about 70% of that habitat left intact, but that could also mean that companies are going in and taking the most valuable and lush, large, old-growth trees, road building, all that kind of stuff. It still goes hand in hand with all this. So in particular, down here you can see there's the 30 to 50%, and then the restoration landscape units. Down here to the south, there's definitely a lot of work to be done, but it's getting better than it was in 2005. But I'd say, we've got 15 years of work on the Great Bear Rainforest, and I'd say we still have another 15 years of work to get it to a point where we can safely say that those spirit bear genes are protected right here in the heart from kind of habitat loss and degradation. Now, this also goes hand in hand. So habitat loss degradation goes hand in hand with salmon. Pacific salmon on the coast of British Columbia are absolutely critical to the survival of bears. And if you've got river valleys, coastal valleys that are starting to kind of have declining populations, or the river is changing and it's kind of dropping the number of fish, then the bears that once relied on that valley have to go somewhere. It's not like they just disappear. They move into other regions. And then when the bears move to another valley, well, they might be displacing some other bears that were already in that valley. And then those bears have to go somewhere. And so it just kind of creates this chain reaction. If you lose habitat in one place, the bears got to go somewhere. And so they end up pushing each other around. And that connects to my next slide, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But salmon, we need salmon on the coast of British Columbia. We need salmon in the Great Bear Rainforest because spirit bears, basically they eat salmon. It makes up more than 35% of their annual calories, the salmon that arrive. And then they eat that, digest the fish, walk up into the forest for a nap, and then maybe they leave that digested fish as it's passed through next to a Sitka spruce tree or next to a cedar tree or near a patch of huckleberries. And guess what's in that scat that bear's just left behind? It's tons and tons of nutrients. It is jam-packed with nutrients from the sea that then fertilize the forest. And it's been shown that bears can take salmon remains, and salmon kind of spreads about 5 kilometers away from river bottoms, creating these incredibly lush and kind of just constantly fertilized or annually fertilized river valleys that can support a lot of life. So salmon is very important. And if you see salmon loss or decline within these coastal rivers, it means we have an issue. And that has been happening in some areas. The area to the south, southern edge of the Great Bear Rainforest where I work, and have worked for the last 8 years, is seeing unprecedented drops in salmon numbers. And guess what it means? It means bears are being displaced and moving, and conflict is higher among those bears. So if there's one thing that we need to ensure for the future success of spirit bears, it is healthy salmon-bearing rivers and environments. Now, another interesting thing, and this kind of ties to habitat loss in other regions, is, well, grizzly bears, they eat lots of salmon as well. I'm sure you all know that. But on the mainland, they typically don't swim over to the islands off the coast of the Great Bear Rainforest. They're mostly restricted to the larger rivers, areas where they've got lots of Chinook salmon, coho, chum coming up, lots of fish for these bears. They're mostly restricted to kind of the mainland river valleys. However, if there's habitat loss, degradation, or salmon run loss, something we are seeing is grizzly bears potentially leaving those areas and swimming. They're very good swimmers. They can swim 2 to 3 miles across the ocean pretty easily. And then they end up on these islands. And then if a grizzly bear ends up sitting in a valley where a spirit bear was hanging out, there is the chance of that spirit bear being still a black bear and less dominant than a grizzly is going to be displaced and have to find another valley to go and feed in, or go find somewhere else to feed. So grizzly bears may be in the future in a bigger way, especially if salmon runs continue to decline on the coast. They may be pushing into spirit bear habitat, further restricting the area in which you can find those bears comfortably fishing in rivers. So those are some of the threats. Now, with that being said, we're in pretty good shape when it comes to conservation initiative. You know, I've got here a little news article. So BC's revered spirit bear is rarer than anyone thought, says First Nations led study. And this is so important because the area in which the spirit bear lives, the Kitasoo-Hehe and the Gitgat First Nations, they work together with the Spirit Bear Research Foundation. They believe they founded the Spirit Bear Research Foundation in order to learn more about these bears. And what's really wonderful about it is people who live and work and rely on that area who are putting in the time and effort and working hard towards learning as much as they can about the environments, learning as much as they can about these bears so that they can protect them into the future. It's the stakeholders there that want to know. And the more information that is available, because you can imagine the research dollars for this remote bear way off in the Great Bear Rainforest that very few people will ever see, it doesn't get the same attention as some of the larger conservation projects. And so it's really important for these groups it has been very important. It will continue to be very important for these groups to kind of focus on studying the bear and basically influencing conservation decisions like that hunting within their region, and kind of really understanding what's going on with the genetics of these bears, where they are, what happens, if a certain river valley is no longer, and basically everything that they're doing now will influence the future for these bears and for their communities. So they're publishing new studies all the time, which is fantastic. And another great part of that is the villages like Hartley Bay and Klemtu. Klemtu is home to a place called Spirit Bear Lodge. It's right in the middle of the Great Bear Rainforest. We've also got Hartley Bay, and then our trips run right through there and visit these communities as well. But they're also bringing the youth of these communities and kind of building a relationship between the youth and this environment and these bears and the programs that they're doing, which is also fantastic. So there's a lot going on in that regard. But at the end of the day, when we talk about what the future for spirit bears looks like, it's looking pretty promising. There is such a value placed on them, not only by those local communities, but also by international travelers like yourselves that go and visit these places. That the future does look good. The Great Bear Rainforest work that's being done to protect those forests and to protect salmon runs and to restrict the amount of industry in the area is a great stepping stone to future endeavors. And everything that we're doing is essentially just helping to build a greater understanding for these extremely rare, unique, and potentially fragile bears. So it's absolutely wonderful. I think that definitely if there's one way you want to help spirit bears or kind of be a part of that is to go on a trip and to sail through there through that area and really experience it, learn about the local peoples, learn about the spirit bears, and bring your dollars into that part of the world so that it can influence those communities and influence future conservation measures in those areas. Incredibly valuable. So with that, folks, I want to thank you very much for tuning into my presentation. And if you want to follow me on Instagram or find me on Facebook, those are my two handles there. And then if you want to learn more information or see if there's something that you can do, maybe you felt really inspired, you can also check out the Spirit Bear Foundation, www.spiritbearfoundation.com. They have an extraordinary amount of information available out there. If you just want to learn more, maybe watch some nice videos or get some reading ideas, it's all there for you. So thank you very much. Yeah, hope you enjoyed.
Thanks, Eddie. That was really fascinating, interesting. I loved it. We do have a lot of questions for you, so I'd like to get to that right away. But first, I just want to remind folks that if they have a question for you, they can submit that in the questions field in your control panel. Okay, first question. Can you please clarify the definition of a Kermode bear?
Sure, yeah. So the Kermode bear essentially is that it's a subspecies of the black bear. So black bears in North America, they're known as Ursus americanus. And then the Kermode bear is found basically in that region of the Great Bear Rainforest and may potentially carry the recessive gene that makes the bear white. So Ursus americanus Kermode gives you the Kermode bear, could be white, could be black, could be carrying the recessive gene regardless of its fur color. And so the spirit bear differs from the Kermode bear in the sense that it is technically a Kermode bear, but because of the white fur, we call it a spirit bear.
Great. Next question. What is the size and weight range of the spirit bear? And can you compare it to, say, an American black bear or a brown bear?
So, well, brown bears typically, that's kind of a complicated answer from my end because black bears in general can range hugely, and so can spirit bears. But spirit bears, we're typically looking at an adult weight of anywhere from 150 to 400 pounds, depending on the age and sex. So they are a good size black bear. Whereas other black bears in North America, you could also get similar size range, 150 to 400 pounds. And then rarely do you see a black bear that's over 400 pounds. And then grizzly bears, typically on the small end for grizzlies, you're looking at like 225, or brown bears rather, 225, 250. And then they can also range upwards of 1,000 pounds, depending on where they are. So like a salmon, a coastal brown bear in British Columbia, that's got the really good genes and has been living in the Great Bear Rainforest for some time, during the salmon run could potentially top 1,000 pounds.
Wow, okay. We've got some questions about cubs, so I'll kind of combine them for you. Are they born with white fur, or does it develop within the first few months of life? And also, are cubs born in dens? And how many cubs does a mother have?
So those are all very good questions. When it comes to the fur color, this is something that's common with all bears. Is bears are typically born toothless, blind, and with very, very fine fur, like 4,000 very fine pieces of hair on their body when they're born, and those will develop. So they're not birthed with this big fluffy white coat of fur, but over the first few months of their life, which is, to combine the questions, is in the den, they will develop white fur. So they won't start as black and then lose their childhood fur and then the white fur would grow in. That is just the color of the fur all the way from the follicle to the tip of the hair. Now, as far as the reproductive side of things go, spirit bears, black bears, grizzly bears, brown bears, polar bears, etc., they give birth. This is a common trait among bears around the world, is that they give birth to these cubs, typically in the den, or like mostly in the den, and they'll usually stay in there for 1 to 3 months, depending on conditions, depending on the species of bear. And when they're born, they're a fraction of the size of their mother, and they're born completely helpless. Like if I was to say, the size of a baby black bear or baby spirit bear when it's born, think like a a can of Coke or something like that. Around that size is probably a pretty accurate representation of the size of a baby bear. You could call the den kind of like an artificial womb. So it's protected from the outside elements, and mom has given birth to them, but they're totally helpless, and so she needs to clean them, feed them, help them go to the bathroom, clean up their bathroom mess, etc. And they'll spend another month to 3 months inside of that den, growing to a size where they can actually generate enough heat and survive in their own bodies outside of the den.
Interesting. So the theory you mentioned earlier about the color of the mother imprinting on the cubs was super interesting. And people were asking about that, of whether or not bears can see the color and if that matters to them. And so one question was if mothers ever reject a cub based on its color, if there's any indication of that.
So I have not read anything about a mother rejecting the cub based on the color of the fur. That has not come across my desk since I've been studying bears in general. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. That's good news.
I wanted to elaborate. I forgot the first part of that question. I wanted to elaborate on that a bit. Can you just repeat the first part of that question?
Sure. Yeah. It's just the theory that you mentioned about the color of the mother imprinting on the cubs when it comes to when that cub grows up and chooses a mate. That theory was quite interesting.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's So same thing. That I haven't heard of a mother abandoning the cub. I think that there's definitely more research to be done on kind of the imprinting that could happen. It's something that's plausible. But even down the road, like the papers that I was reading, they kind of suggest that it's not actually a strong enough factor to like restrict a white cub from only mating with other white bears in its adult life. It's not a strong enough factor. There's a lot of hormones, pheromones going on that really kind of make that magic happen more so, I believe. Another thing too is just bears in general. I think that's another thing that comes up is, bears in color vision. What's their vision like? A simple way for me to kind of describe that is bears have similar vision to ours. They don't necessarily rely on their vision for everything. They rely mostly on their noses for sniffing things out, even in the daytime. I've had it where a bear has been, 50 feet from me, looks at me, but preferred to actually walk in a circle around me so that it was downwind, and then actually sniff me and then be like, okay, yeah, that's for sure a person. It's like they can see something, but maybe they don't trust it, so they have to smell it to really trust what they're seeing. And on top of that, bears have dichromatic color vision. And so they do see in some form of colors, not the same vibrance that we do, but they do see some form of color.
Interesting. Okay. Let's see. Are there variations genetically, like human eye color with degrees of brown or blue in eye color? Is that the same with when it comes to color of these bears? Are there variations of white and black, or is it just all white and black?
So yeah, you could get other variations in there, but if you've got a white bear, it's going to be a white bear. And it may appear like even the bear that's on the screen right now, you can kind of see it's got that cream color. That's most likely from its natural, the natural oils coming off its skin onto its fur, oxidizing and giving it kind of that yellowish color. Or it could just be the bear's kind of dirty, living in a soggy, muddy rainforest. It could happen. But you won't get any variations. You typically won't get like, I've never heard of it where you have like a bear that looks like a black and white cow, you know what I mean? Like patches of black and patches of white. Doesn't really happen like that. The one thing that I have seen though is, and it would be really interesting to kind of see like genetically why this occurs in black bears, is you can get a black bear that has like and I'm not talking about a moon bear or Asiatic black bear. I'm talking about an American black bear in the Great Bear Rainforest. I've seen it where it has like a crescent-shaped moon patch on its chest. it almost looks like a shield kind of smiley face type thing on his chest. And that was in an adult bear. So, but I don't know how connected that might be to spirit bear genetics, if at all. I doubt it is. But again, that's something I love about questions, is it gives me more stuff to research and figure out. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question we have here is, do the bears have a natural predator?
Do the bears have so something I always like to say, that's a great question. Something I like to say about bears is, what is a bear's worst enemy, or what is the bear's what should a bear be most afraid of? And I'm going to say, other than humans. The answer is typically another bear, for a variety of reasons. But the closest thing to a natural predator would be when a bear is a cub. So when a black bear is 3 to 6 months old, and it's the size of a basketball or something like that. It's it weighs 15 or 20 pounds, and it's really just figuring stuff out. There have been documented or observed encounters with wolves, where wolves have taken a cub, or they've coaxed a cub away from mom and then injured it, and then mom had to abandon it, and then the wolves go in and take the cub. But other than that, there's not really a natural predator other than potentially another bear, especially in the adult phase of their life, potentially another bear or humans.
Okay. Do you know what the human population is in or around the rainforest?
In the Great Bear Rainforest, oh gosh, I haven't seen a census for that region, but it is extraordinarily remote. Like, even the place where I work, it's a seasonal lodge. The closest permanent settlement to where I am, and I'm up one of these big inlets, is 50 kilometers away. And even then, at that permanent settlement, there's only like 6 people that live there. So the Great Bear Rainforest is largely uninhabited. There's a lot of seasonal villages, seasonal camps. But then you do have permanent First Nation settlements and year-round, basically villages that are lived in year-round in places like Klemtu and Hartley Bay. And so, I don't know. I would say less than 3,000 people in the entire Great Bear Rainforest.
Okay.
But I'd have to do further research on that.
Sure. When is the best time of year to see them? If you wanted to travel there, when would you recommend going out?
There's part of me that wants to say whatever the itinerary dates are for the 2021 Spirit Bear trips. But no, in all honesty, if you want to kind of hedge your bets and go for the highest possibility of seeing spirit bears, and this often goes hand in hand with bear viewing, is the Salmon Run is when you want to go. So that would be like late August and September is kind of your best bet. And that the timing for salmon runs varies depending on where you are on the coast, and also varies depending on the species of salmon. But from my reading, the best time to go for spirit bears is definitely late August, September. It's a great time to go for bears in British Columbia in general. So yeah, I'd say kind of in that range.
Great. And if anyone's wondering, our 2021 dates are in September and early October. So let's see.
Perfect.
Oh, there were a few people who wanted to know if you had any recommendations as far as books about spirit bears.
Oh, there's that's a good question. My whole library is in my truck right now.
Maybe a good question to come
I would
back
say, I mean,
in terms of emailing you later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's actually, here. This one it's not necessarily, I got them right here. I found them. I'll turn my webcam on for a moment.
Okay.
Share my webcam. Am I on?
Yep.
Okay. So This is just a really beautiful read, and like kind of like a must-have. It's one of my most cherished books. It's called Canada's Forgotten Coast: The Great Bear Rainforest, written by Ian McAllister and Karen McAllister. Ian McAllister and Karen McAllister are the founders of a conservation organization in British Columbia called Pacific Wild. And really, it's just got some really beautiful imagery, pictures of bears, information, stories, all kinds of really lovely stuff. As far, it's not so much scientific literature, but it is a really beautiful and moving read. So I recommend that one. And then another one. This is actually one I haven't had the opportunity to read yet, but was recommended to me by some friends that live or that have worked in those regions, which is Spirit Bear by Charlie Russell here. So those of you who aren't familiar with Charlie Russell, he went over to the Kamchatka Peninsula, and he did some work with grizzly bears over there, and really learnt a lot about the bears and their behavior and how to live with them and that kind of stuff. How to live alongside bears, which is, I think, a lesson that a lot of North America is really learning. Is, you know, it's definitely a transition I'm seeing in the last 10 years, is really a transition from, you know, bears are over here, humans are over here, to now it's more like we can live in the same area and live together safely. We just have to protect each other or protect the bears from their noses, essentially, and really learn how to behave and be tolerant to bears, because the bears are so tolerant to us. So a lot of those lessons kind of were learnt and shared by Charlie Russell. And so this is bound to be a really solid read once I get to it.
Great. Well, I think that's a good place to end it today. We are 10 minutes past the hour, so I'm going to hand it back to you, Eddie, for some closing comments.
Well, folks, I would just say, you know, I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and thank you very much. I really, I know there's a few people that I've had on some of my trips before, so hello to all of you out there. You rock for tuning in. And for those of you who I haven't met yet, I really, I look forward to having you on trip and spending some time with you talking about bears. I'm kind of as it said on Nat Hab's website, I'm a bit of a bear junkie, so I love to learn and share as much as I can about any bear.
Well, thank you so much, Eddie. This was really great. And I'd like to thank everyone who tuned in today as well. Be sure to join us next week. We do have the lineup going out this weekend, and you can also check it out right now on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, so we'll have that replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks, Eddie.
Cheers. Thank you.